Good morning. This is the TCG Pro Show. I'm your host, Brad Williams, and I'm joined by my co-host, Don Williams here. Good morning.
Good morning.
We have a special show here for you this morning. We have a guest who we're excited to sit down with. You may have seen him before, but we decided to redo it. So if you have, sorry. If not, this is definitely something you're going to want to tune into. We're joined this morning by Abe Mendez, the Radon Specialist. We think he's hands down the best radon guy in the area, and we're going to talk to him about all things radon. Welcome to the show this morning, Abe.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, so let's jump right in. How's everybody doing?
Good.
Yeah?
Doing good.
Yeah, it's decided to be winter again around here, hasn't it?
Yeah.
It's a little chilly. So before we get started, I just want to mention that about a week ago, we had the privilege of actually being on site with Abe during a mitigation process. And I just want to say, from my personal experience as a general contractor, Abe knows his stuff. He knows what he's doing, and it's so apparent in how he performs the job. And I just want to say I'm real impressed with that, and it just fits perfectly in with what we're doing as the closing guys, bringing
Absolutely.
on people that know what they're doing.
Well, you know, we mean it when we say that we want to connect the best experts in the area with people. That's not blowing smoke. We mean that, and
Absolutely.
we feel like with Abe we can feel really confident in recommending him and his work and his expertise. Before we get rolling, I want to let everybody know, because this show is live, we would love to hear your comments and questions. We have Nikki over off camera monitoring them, and if you guys want to ask any questions of Abe or either one of us, throw them in the comments section and we'll get to them as we go through the show.
Yeah.
Cool? All right. So, Abe, we had talked a little bit about this the other day, but can you tell us a little bit about how you got started with radon mitigation and all?
Sure. I started many years ago, back in 2002. I actually did home inspections back then, and I used to do radon testing. And when the radon levels came back high, clients would ask me, what do I need to do to fix it? Well, I didn't know. So I started doing research, and a friend of mine was doing radon mitigations. And I got into mitigations and got out of home inspections and never turned back since.
Yeah. So if you don't mind me asking, just kind of a sidetrack, what made you want to leave home inspections for radon mitigation? Just better gig?
Yeah, you guys got it tough. So
that's what I was looking for.
Yeah, you guys got it tough. The amount of time spent on a house and the amount of hours spent at home doing reports took up a lot of time. Mm-hmm. So in the radon world, as far as mitigation goes, once I get to a structure and I figure it out, install the system, then when I leave that job site, other than the post-test, my work is done.
Yeah, that is that's one of the downsides. People don't understand, we come out there and we're on the job for a couple hours doing the inspection. They don't realize that we're spending at least that much time, if not more, on the report writing. Okay, yeah, we'll adjust this mic a little bit. I think these mics are pretty sensitive. Are we good on sound over there?
Perfect.
Yeah, our sound tech says we're good on sound this morning. So let's go right back to the basics here. For anybody that's not familiar, I think when we do home inspections, we ask about radon. People say, well, what is radon? Can you explain a little bit about what that is?
Sure. Radon's a naturally occurring gas that's everywhere. And it's odorless, colorless, and tasteless. And the only way to find out if you have it or elevated levels is to actually test for it.
So why would someone be concerned about elevated levels of radon in their home?
EPA says that radon is the second leading cause of lung cancer in the U.S., and they attribute it approximately 20,000 deaths per year of non-smokers to radon. So
that's pretty serious. Talking about radon levels, can you explain a little bit about how that's measured and what you're looking for, about what those levels are, what we're testing for?
Sure. Radon is measured in picocures per liter. So EPA sets the threshold at a 4.0. So 4.0 picocures per liter and above is considered elevated. 3.9 and below is considered acceptable.
It seems like in some of my radon training that I've taken as a home inspector that they kind of determine that number because they believe that pretty much any structure can be reduced below that number. Is that true, or
that's
is that
correct?
Okay.
No, that's correct.
And that level, depending on what country or what region you live in, and in the U.S. it's 4, but I think we'd had a conversation and you explained that maybe in other places they have different.
Yeah, and in the
thresholds.
UK and Canada, I think the thresholds are a little different.
Okay, that's interesting. And really what that is, it's the picocuries per liter is a measurement of how many particles are happening in a given volume of space.
That's correct.
So there's different ways to test for radon. What you want to talk about those different methods of testing?
Sure. There's 2 types of tests you can do. Obviously, there's multiple equipment you can do, but 2 types of tests. You have a long-term and a short-term. So a short-term is average anywhere between 48 hours to a week. You can do it up to 89 days if you want. Normally, that's not done. Long-term testing is 90 days or more. And the long-term test is obviously more accurate because it gives you what your yearly average is over the testing period.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're doing short-term tests, like when we go out and set a test, we just use a lab charcoal canister test, but there's also ion chamber tests. Can you explain how those work? What the system of testing is? Like how does a charcoal test work? How does an ion chamber test work?
So charcoal absorbs basically what the radon levels are, and it can absorb some moisture. So there's some factors in a charcoal canister that ion chambers don't. Ion chambers, basically, it's a chamber that's electrically charged, and when the radon particles hit the chambers, it burns voltage, and the separation between the voltage and the amount of time you put them out gives you what your numbers are. And then you have a continuous monitor, which the continuous monitor is basically similar. It takes the radon particles during the testing period, and it gives you your hourly readings. So if you want to graph it or chart it, then you can get a continuous monitor, gives you hourly readings over the testing period, and then gives you the overall average at the end.
Are there concerns with continuous monitors? Is there issues with that? Is that a guaranteed great way of testing? Are there some things people should look out for?
No, continuous monitors are good depending on what equipment you get. I mean, obviously you have to have, once you buy the equipment like a continuous monitor for certification, you have to calibrate it every year. So it's not buy it and then go several years without getting these machines calibrated. You have to send it back to the manufacturer. They expose it to a known number, and then they gauge it and calibrate it based on that known number.
So if the meter were to get off during that period of time, does it just shut down, or would you know that it was off if you're
You can, and a lot of it has to do with the chart. So the person actually doing the test has to basically have a good background as far as radon goes, because you can see spikes throughout the day. So you'll have some days where the homeowner is there and the radon levels may be a little bit lower because of the opening and closing doors, the HVAC may be on, and then from like 1 in the morning to 6 in the morning when everything is quiet, you might have a fluctuation or spike in the radon.
Okay.
As long as the separation is not, from a 4.0 to a 28 and then back down to a 4.0, then more than likely it's not going to be the...
So you mentioned something in that comment about opening and closing doors.
Uh-huh.
What's the best scenario for setting this, for running the test? Do all the doors need to be closed all the time? Can you kind of tell us what's the best scenario?
Best scenario is nobody lives there during
Okay.
the testing period. And I know realtors ask us all the time. They say, hey, the house has been closed up, for 3 weeks. There's nobody been living in it, but it doesn't make a difference because there's no such thing as stale radon. There's brand new radon molecules every 3.6 days. Radon has a half-life. So as far as testing goes, if somebody does live there, then normally the EPA sets the guidelines to say you have to have closed house conditions during the testing period, which means normal entry and exit. Don't leave the doors and windows standing open, because what you're trying not to do is introduce fresh air into the house and get a false radon.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so radon test is set in a house. Is there a right and wrong place to set the test in a house?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The easiest way to go is if you go to the Buyer's and Seller's Guide to Radon. It'll tell you all the specs. But like some of it is, 20 inches off, at least 20 inches off the floor, 3 feet away from any opening out of the structure, not directly blowing under a supply return event. What else?
Lowest level of the house, too.
The lowest livable area. And it doesn't have to be, for instance, if it's a basement and it's unfinished, then you can put the test there, because the EPA states that whether finished or unfinished has the potential to be finished, then that's where you place the test. So an unfinished basement, which has the potential to be finished, is where you place the test.
Excellent.
Yeah, the idea, again, from kind of what I've learned, is that it's between like 20 inches and 8 feet. It's where people are breathing air, and that's where you want to get it. It wouldn't be any good if it was up near the ceiling or right on the floor, because nobody's breathing that. Is that kind of the idea?
It is, and radon's a heavy gas too, so it's gonna go toward the floor more than it would. So you don't want to get that concentration that's closest to the slab. You want to at least give it some room, like the 20 inches, for instance, minimum.
Right.
Because you might get a false positive.
So can we talk a little bit about how radon actually gets into the house? Sure. How does that happen?
Normally it seeps either through the foundation walls, up through the concrete slab, are the two spots it normally comes in.
And more so, the control joints in the slab, the edges, kind of the cracks are basically where it comes up. So this brings an interesting point that comes up a lot during home inspections. Get asked, so I have a crawl space, so I shouldn't be worried about radon.
No, it's not true. Yeah. So depends on the concentration of radon. You could have crawl space, all the vents can be open, and you still have a high enough level of radon in the main part of the house that you're going to be elevated above a 4. Whereas if you closed all the, let's say the cross ventilations, your radon levels now are no longer a 4, it could be 9 or 10. So it depends on the concentration of radon inside the soil. Right. It's going to depend on how much. So whether you have a crawl space, slab, or basement, it doesn't matter.
So, and I think this is one of the biggest pieces of consumer advice that we can give, and that's that everyone should test for radon. That's the only way to know.
Absolutely.
And so the other thing that we hear maybe is, my neighbors tested for radon and they didn't have it, so I'm good. Is that true?
No, you have to test.
So it can vary from house to house, neighborhood to neighborhood, and then that changes over time. So it's really, it's not a one-time thing. You should be testing on some type of periodic level. Is that right? How does that work?
Correct. So if you test it in your home and you do not have a radon system, EPA recommends you test once every 5 years. If you have an active system, then the EPA recommends you test once every 2 years.
Oh, okay.
So I think that's another thing that we run into, just from the experience that I see. People say, well, I have a radon system, so we don't need to test. But you need to, there's been radon there, so you need to try to get an idea of whether or not that system is functioning properly. So it's maybe even more important.
Correct. Yeah, just because the fan is running doesn't mean it's working.
And I'd like to talk a little bit about system design as we move down the road, but a few other things about radon levels. How do environmental conditions affect radon? Water tables, rain, weather?
It can affect it. Normally, if you have heavy winds, it could actually push the radon back into the structure. Or if you have a good saturation of the ground, like several inches of rain, what happens is the ground around the house gets saturated, and the radon levels, instead of coming up through the grass and through the dirt, it's going to push back into the structure.
Yeah, I think what people don't realize is that the pressure envelope in a house can be different based on the way the ventilation is designed, the way the HVAC system is designed, and some of those things can create to where you're sucking air back into the house versus,
How about barometric pressure? Does that affect?
It does.
Okay.
Yeah, it can change and elevate, or do the complete opposite. It can decrease the radon levels.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. We've heard a few things, some comments about, we've had a really, really wet winter. Are we seeing higher radon levels because of all the wet weather we've had over the past several months?
Yeah, normally during the wintertime you'll get a little bit higher radon levels than in the summer. Mm-hmm. And it could be because, a lot of it could be because of the rain we've had lately. Or it could be, when we have freezing temperatures, when the ground freezes around it, it's sort of like the saturated ground with the rain. When the ground freezes, the radon is going to seek the least path of resistance and push back into the structure.
Mm-hmm. Where it's not freezing.
Correct.
Exactly.
Yep.
So does that kind of cover the testing aspect and how it gets into a home? We kind of covered those topics.
I believe so.
Okay. So we've let's say we have a house, we've tested for radon, we've done a test, it's come back high enough that we feel confident that it's not doesn't need to be retested or long-term testing, and you come in to do mitigation. That would be the next step, right? Can you talk a little bit about the process of how that works? I know that begins, you do some pretty cool diagnostic steps. Can you explain a little bit of that?
Sure. When we come out to every house, we do what we call diagnostics. It usually takes 30 minutes to 2 hours. It just kind of depends on the structure and how much diagnostics we do. So the basic diagnostics is what we do is we try to create a negative pressure underneath the slab and see if we can move air from one spot to another. In a perfect world, if you have, let's say, a 57-stone aggregate underneath the house and you can move air freely, then you could almost put the radon system anywhere. If not, if it's slab on grade or we have to chase the radon and figure out where it's coming from, then we have equipment where we could do graph sampling and figure out where the highest concentration of radon is coming from. And then with that information is where we design the system.
Yeah, when we were out at this was really cool, the process we got to see the other week. So if you're watching this, we're going to have some videos out where you're going to be able to see what this process looks like. And it's really worth a watch because you're going to get a good idea of what all is involved in this. I think that there is a misconception out there that you just punch a hole in the slab and put a pipe and a fan in and that's it. And it's really more than that. What is that? You were showing us this really cool tool you use to get samples and boring holes and then grabbing samples. What is all that?
Basically, it's a monitor. And it does graph sampling, and it can give me readings within minutes of how much actual radon is coming from underneath the slab and the soil before it has a chance to come up through the house. And
you actually do that in different locations to figure out where the highest concentration is under the house. Is that how that works?
Yeah, that's true.
I thought it was pretty amazing how high that it is actually under the slab as opposed to in the living area.
It is. Yeah, from corner to corner in the house. You can have one corner of the house reading, 500-600, and then you have the other corner of the house reading 25-30.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it was, the house that we were in, I can't remember the details, but the levels weren't extreme. They were, I think, in the teens in the house during the testing, but under the slab, they're in the hundreds, several hundred range.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's real important to know that. I mean, I think that's a point worth kind of emphasizing is if you know where it's the highest, you can actually make sure that you draw from that highest point to get it out of the living area.
Correct. Yeah.
What other considerations go into designing a system besides just getting the highest radon area?
So what size pipe to use, either 3 or 4 inch, which fan to use. It's not one fan fix all. So if a company tells you that they'll upsize your fan for X amount of dollars, there's no such thing. You have to size the fan for the house. So the diagnostics tells me what fan I need for the house. Do I need a high volume fan? Do I need a tight suction fan? So depending on the diagnostics, depends on which fan we use.
I think that's a good point. And then we've seen systems in some houses we've inspected where they'll have multiple pickup points. Is that necessary sometimes because of the lack of air movement under the slab? Is that what's going on?
It is, yeah. Sometimes what we try to do is you can attach multiple suction points to one system. So this way the homeowner's not paying for multiple systems. You could tee it all to one system. You just have to know the size of the fan and the square footage and do a little bit of math to figure out if that fan's going to be strong enough to do the multiple suction points.
So we talked about slab. Let's talk about crawl space. What would you have to do to mitigate a crawl space because you don't have a slab to bore? And
Correct. You have to create that, and I think some realtors don't understand that crawl spaces are more labor intensive than a slab or a basement foundation because that's already there. So in a crawl space, we have to create that barrier between the soil gases and the home. So on a crawl space, we have to lay corrugated pipe and then take the plastic and tape all the seams, wrap all the pillars, and then attach that corrugated pipe to a fan that's on the outside of the house. So that plastic barrier or the vapor barrier between the dirt and the system traps the soil gases long enough to allow this radon system to suck the soil gases out.
So quite a bit more involved.
There is, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If anybody's watching right now live, we are taking questions. We would love to hear from you. Anything that you'd like to know about radon, we'd be happy to get to that as we go through the show. So what are some of the mistakes that are made with system installations? What are some of the wrong ways to do it?
I've seen several systems that are put like inside of the home. Like when I bought my house, for instance, another company put in a radon system, and they had the fan in the drop ceiling underneath the living space, and you can't do that.
The fan's supposed to go on the outside of the house, is that correct?
Either outside or unconditioned space, such as an attic. You can put it in an attic, and you can put it on the outside. You can't put it on the livable area. So, for instance, you can't put it in the crawl space. Mm-hmm. You can't put it in a drop ceiling in a basement that's below living space. So there's certain guidelines we have to follow. And then, and I'll go back to my house again because I had to redo the whole thing. The exhaust of the fan was blowing directly underneath the deck. Well, the whole purpose of getting rid of the radon is to blow it past the roof line. So if you open a window, open anything, or if you're standing on the front porch, you don't breathe it back. Because just like we talked about earlier with those crazy numbers, a couple of hundred, that's what the fan is blowing out.
Right.
And you don't want to breathe that stuff in. So there's certain guidelines set as far as venting the system itself.
So how often do you see systems that you have to replace or repair?
Quite a bit.
Really? Okay. Good to know. I mean, it's valuable information because a lot of people assume, well, this house has a system in it, so we're good. And
that's not the case.
Yep.
And a lot of people, honestly, they don't find out until they sell their homes, and then the home inspector writes their system up. Mm-hmm. And then it goes back to now they call somebody to come fix it.
Right.
So when you put a system in, you put your name, contact information on the system, itself. So if anybody had a problem with it, they could call you for repairs. Is that a given, or is that's
required?
Required.
Yeah, you have to put your name, company's name, your name, contact information, and most important, your certification number.
So that brings up a really good point here. Not everybody that probably hears this show will be able to hire you. You know, I think a lot of them are local, but maybe they're not. Maybe they'll be looking for a radon specialist out of the area. What is your advice to someone who is in need of testing and mitigation? What should they be looking for with their specialist?
There's a whole list of stuff looking for a contractor. So if they go to my website, they can read it.
What is your website?
TheRadonSpecialist.com.
Okay.
If they go there and it says looking for a qualified contractor, and they can just kind of go off that list. But a lot of the stuff that's on there is you want to make sure that the contractor or the person actually installing the system is certified to do so. Some states regulate it, very few, maybe 8 states out of 50. Mm-hmm. But the states that don't regulate it, there is a national certification that you can get. And one of them is going to be with the NRPP, which is a National Radon Proficiency Program. And the other is the NRSB, which is the National Radon Safety Board. So if you go to either one of those websites and look up in your area, it goes by state, then you can see a list of individuals that's actually certified to do the radon work.
So that's a good way to actually go to the websites of the certification boards, and then they can kind of help you find the right individual. Is that what you probably recommend doing?
I do.
And what certifications do you carry? Do you keep?
A bunch.
A bunch?
So,
all of them?
Actually, I do have them all. I'm certified through both boards, the NRPP and the NRSB. I have a dual certification in radon mitigations. I'm also a certified measurement provider, which means testing. And I do multifamily, I do single-family, commercial buildings like schools. I do radon-resistant new construction. I'm certified in that, and I'm certified in multifamily mitigations as well.
So, why did you get both certifications with both entities? Is there an advantage for one to the other? Do some people recognize one over the other?
The more recognized one is the NRPP, which is the National Radon Safety Board. I'm sorry, the National Radon Proficiency Program. That was bigger. And then the second one is the NRSB. I hold to because it was a challenge.
Okay.
Other than that, there's not one that outweighs the other. You still have to go through a testing process, and you still have to go through CE hours every so often to keep your certification.
That's good to know.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that you wanted to hold both. I mean, just again, you're extremely professional, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah, when we were out doing that system, I think one of the things we both noticed was not only did you do a super clean install, you keeps high end tools to make sure that the drilling is neat and tidy. They're not busting up walls with hammers and jackhammers and all that kind of stuff. They've got these really nice drills that make tight holes, and then you routed the system in a way that was aesthetically pleasing on the outside of the house as well. So if this is going to be, if it was my home and I was buying a system, I would care about these things, and we appreciate the kinds of things that you do like that. Do we have any questions, sweetie?
Not at this moment.
Okay, I just wanted to check. What other things are on your mind, Dad, before we...
I think that covers a whole lot of is there anything else that you can think of, Abe, that we haven't covered?
Honestly, no. I think we covered it all.
Why don't you talk about that house that you extremely high ratings recently? You talked about that last time.
Oh, the 75? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a high house.
Yeah, so just to kind of recap the story, it was a house that our inspection company inspected. We did a charcoal canister test in the basement, and then got back a pretty high reading. It was in the 70s. Mm-hmm. Set a second test, it was much lower, and then you went out and did some testing and all. And so, tell us a little bit about what happened with that.
Well, the house was almost split in two. And when we did our grab sampling, we did the highest part of the house, which is, if you're facing a house, in this case, it was the left side closest mm-hmm. to the garage. And we put a suction point in the closet and then rerouted it up into the main level garage, which is a 3-car garage. And then we attached to the main level garage and then vented it into the attic. Not vented into the attic, but ran the pipe up into the attic, put the fan, and then penetrated the roof to vent it. And we got the radon levels down to, I think, a 1.8. It was in the ones. It was high ones, so 1.7, 1.8.
So that's amazing. From the 70s, got it down to 1.
Have you ever seen a house that you can't get the levels down below a 4?
No. I hope not, because I guarantee to reduce it below 4. So, I haven't had a house. Not to say I haven't had to come back and do some modifications to the system. That happens every so often, even with the diagnostics tools I have.
Right.
But we do everything we can just to do it in the first.
So I want to, one thing that I do want to kind of go back to here real quick is, I'll admit our ignorance in this, but when you install a system, there's a gauge
Correct.
Put on that system. And I was even under the belief, based on the numbers on that system, that it was measuring radon, but it is not.
No.
So what is that gauge all about, and why is that there?
All right, so the gauge is called the manometer, mini-U for short, and what that does, it measures vacuum pressure of the fan. So it's a visual aid for the homeowner to see that the fan is running without physically always having to go outside or in the attic to check the fan. So as long as the levels are uneven, mm-hmm. Then the fan is pulling a vacuum, and when it evens out to 0, that means the fan quit pulling a vacuum, and it's right next to the sticker where they can call me.
But it has nothing to do with the radon level. Correct. So realtors, potential home buyers, you're in a house, you see a radon system, you see a gauge.
Inspectors.
Has nothing to do with radon. It really just has to do with whether or not the fan's working.
I want us to go back to a point that you made about the house that we were just talking about, where you actually pulled air from under the garage slab. So mm-hmm. That's not a living area, but correct. Why would you do that?
Because the garage in this case is not a detached garage. It's an attached garage. It's on the main level, but the wall butts up against where the basement is. Radon's a heavy gas, and instead of pushing up through the garage, it's going to push through the walls down into the basement. So with double-digit numbers usually, then the concern is that the radon is coming and emanating through that wall, keeping the basement elevated. So a lot of the times you can treat the entire slab in the basement and drop the levels down to, let's say, a 4 or 5, but you need that extra. So that extra is coming, the radon is coming from the slab of the garage on the main level.
So the garage level is up above the basement level, so that gas was, because it's a heavy gas, it was actually can come through that wall as opposed to going through. So I that's the first I had heard of that, and that's just that's an interesting point to consider.
Right.
So
Yeah, I think it just continues to reinforce the whole idea that you need a knowledgeable professional when it comes to system design and installation. It's not just put a pipe somewhere.
well, yeah,
and call it a day.
find the most aesthetical place and just put a pipe there. That's not necessarily the
It's
the
not,
best thing.
and we had an install last week where the homeowner actually put in a system, his own system.
Uh-huh.
The DIY? They did it themselves?
Yes, is that what it is? DIY. I'm sorry.
Do
I'm
it
not-
yourself.
Oh, okay. So yes, he did it himself, and the radon levels, he dropped it down a point, but he was at a 10. So he was able to drop it down a point, and it was slab on grade. Now his install was neat. The pipe was straight, and the water flow pitched back.
Look pretty.
It did look pretty, but he only brought it down to like an 8.9.
Okay.
And then he decided that it was more than it actually seemed, so he decided to hire a professional company to do it. We got in there, and the majority of his radon was actually coming from an enclosed sunroom on the main level.
Yeah.
We were reading a lot of radon there, and after we fixed and modified and added another system, we got him down to, I believe, like a 1.9.
Well, there you go. You need a professional. If you think it's expensive to hire a professional, try doing it with amateur work. You know, you end up coming back either way. What she asked
I'm
was,
sorry.
why is it important to do a radon test during a home purchase? Why that is a pertinent time to go ahead and get tested?
The main thing is, obviously, you want to know your living conditions of what you're moving into. You want to know what the radon levels are. Some people, honestly, some people aren't concerned about radon. They should be, but they're not. If you're not concerned at least about that it causes lung cancer, then you might want to be concerned with actual resale. So you might want to be concerned if you don't test for radon and then you find out years from now and you go to sell your home and you haven't installed a system, then you're stuck with flipping the bill for the next person that is concerned about radon. So
Yeah,
if you're
and-
not concerned about the health issues, then some people are concerned about the monetary.
Yeah, people only live in a house for, 6-7 years on average, and you're talking, somewhere in the neighborhood of a couple $1,000s or more for a system, depending on the design and the installation. So, it's the same reason why you want to get a home inspection
Right.
ahead of buying a house. It's because there's still an opportunity for the seller to possibly rectify the situation, as opposed to you being stuck with those issues. So I think that's a great piece of advice. Thank you, director, producer over there. And
a story behind that one, we had one similar in Greensboro where the actual realtor recommended not to do a radon test because it was over a crawl space. And the homeowner took the realtor's advice and didn't do a radon test because the realtor's never had issues with radon in that area. And then she tested because she had a small child in a playroom, obviously on the main level or the crawl space, and the radon levels were like an 8. And we had to put in a system, and on that particular house, we put in 2 systems. So in the long run, a $7,550 test wound up costing her, I think, $3,200 to fix it.
right. Yeah, so a typical radon test is what, between $75 and $125? Is that pretty normal?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So cheap insurance, just go ahead and get the test. I mean, it's the same thing with all these things you do during the due diligence process of buying a house. It is the home inspection, the radon test, the pest test, the pest inspection. They're all minimal compared to the investment and the purchase that you're making, and usually minimal compared to the fixes that come behind if there's a problem.
Can you give us a range of what mitigation systems cost?
Typically, a radon system would range anywhere between $1,500 and up. So basements and slabs usually between $1,500 and $1,700, and then crawl spaces typically run $2,000 and up. And it's mainly because of the amount of work that needs to be put into it.
Right. All the more reason to test with the crawl space. Yeah. So I think this is some really valuable advice. We really appreciate you sharing this stuff with us. This is the kind of consumer advice that I think needs to be out there about these kinds of topics. People operate way too much on, I don't even know what you
hearsay.
Call it. Hearsay, yeah. Way too much on hearsay and not on the facts. And the facts are, get your house tested. So
Agreed.
Thanks for being on the show this morning. We really appreciate you coming back. Anything else you'd like to add?
I'm done.
All right. Well, we'll be back. We'll be back very soon with a new episode of The Pro Show. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and we'll see you soon.